Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Internet of Senses Sound Podcast. My name is Tyler Heaton. I am a sound designer and research in the Spatial Technologies Applied Research and Training Center at Lethbridge College, where I specialize in the implementation of spatial media and technology in immersive experience design. Today, I will be speaking with Van West, CEO and founder of Vocalytics, about the power of sound paired with AI to make important changes to the way technology interprets our physical environment to aid multiple industries. Van West is an entrepreneur and strategic development executive with over 15 years experience leading startup teams to success. His latest Techstar-backed venture is Vocalytics, and I quote, an audio-based AI platform that listens to ambient sound, analyzes events and trends, and sends real-time alerts to enterprises that need them most. Van is also a founding member of the Open Voice Network, which is an organization dedicated to developing the technical standards and ethical use guidelines for the emerging world of voice and conversational artificial intelligence. Van, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Tyler.
I wanted to start out because of your background with entrepreneurship and with business development and executive development. I was curious with Vocalytics, did you have a background in sound or audio? What was sort of your previous experience with sound and audio, and how did that play a role in this decision to start work on Vocalytics?
Yeah, I'd say there were two key elements to my background that speak to kind of sound, audio, and I would say even AI and touching video mediums as well. I had a startup that I was the first key hire brought in just outside the founders, where we'd scaled very, very quickly to a team of 65 globally, 3 offices, early customers being all the way from the likes of Fortune 1 to Disney to lots of global brands. And you saw a lot of success with analyzing video. And I've historically been a bit of an audiophile. So, love sound, have loved sounds and quality sound specifically for a very long time. Saw an opportunity to realize that, these visual mediums, as we're visual beings for the most part, there's a lot of other value in the absent vision of sound, or the invisible vision of sound. So we kind of found a way, we architected a way to visualize sound through a vision medium. So at our heart, we're actually a computer vision company, even though we're using it to analyze sound and frequencies and raw spectrograms as well.
Very interesting. Sound is a very scientific medium. It's a very scientific sense. Did you have a background in the science of sound, or have you gained more scientific understanding of sound as you've worked with these different processes?
Yeah, it's been the latter. I've gained a much more scientific knowledge and experience from diving deeply into this endeavor. It's been that. It's been a bit of a hobby that's turned into a profession, and beyond the profession, it's become a lifestyle at this point.
Very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about the opportunity? You spoke a moment ago about, seeing all this visual media and this visual medium, and then the sound component of it. What was the aha moment for you with that opportunity? Where did you first start looking at analyzing sound as opposed to visual, or sound in addition to visual?
I'd say it probably started with my last venture prior to founding Vocalytics. And that computer vision company I was telling you about, where we were able to do edge compute, edge AI, ingesting thousands of security feeds on site, processing on a server, just in the back of house, just like security feeds go into a DVR. We'd be able to plug our servers in and do all that real-time compute without having that heavy lift of hitting the cloud. So looking at the visual medium, most security cameras, ironically, most people don't realize this, but there's a tiny little pinhole that you typically don't see or don't realize is there, and it's actually a microphone. Some of them have multiple microphones. And there's lots of other types of microphones that are just even smaller than cameras are. So realizing that a camera can only see in a certain direction with a certain field of vision, and obviously can't see through walls and pillars and around corners. But sound is more than 360 dimensions, or 360 degrees. And so realizing that if a security camera is pointed in a singular direction and it has a microphone attached to it, even from a safety and security basis, for glass breaking, glass shattering, glass cracking, even aggression detection, a gunshot, an explosion, even some of those pinpointed use cases around safety and security. If a camera is not pointing in that direction, you don't understand that incident if there isn't someone around. But if it has a microphone embedded with this degree of intelligence, there's a lot of value that we can provide in a passive ambient manner.
Such an interesting point you made about sound being more than 360 degrees. You talk about critical incidents like glass breaking, aggression, gunshot sounds. How important is the ability to localize those sounds to people who are analyzing that data or getting that data through a feed?
It's a different answer for a different use case. If there's an active shooter on site, and not that we're focused too heavily in security solutions or defense today, but if there is, as an example, we're not just able to classify that weapon type based on that sound signature, but if there's multiple microphones in an array, even distributed through multiple cameras across the courtyard, there are ways to virtualize and localize that moment. So we can actually get you the exact weapon classification. So is this a handgun that could be concealed or an assault rifle that it's just frankly a different level of threat. Also being able to understand from an omnidirectional perspective with multiple microphones, the approximate distance and direction that active shooter came from. There's a different level of threat and the nature of localization from that use case versus a lot of the work we're doing today in a very underserved market, especially acoustically, in hospital rooms. We're very focused on healthcare and specifically around the patient experience and how disruptive those beeping hospital poles, I want to say on the environmental side are, and alarms and machinery, but also the behavioral nature of coughing, wheezing, heavy breathing, and the myriad of other sounds in those use cases. So I'd say from a localization perspective, the security aspects and defense aspects definitely require a more granular level of detail than helping to enhance patient experience, though it's incredibly disruptive when you think about restful sleep means faster recovery times, improved outcomes, higher patient experience scores, and therefore stronger reimbursements through Medicare. It's actually a reimbursable factor. So we've been able to kind of piece that business case together throughout COVID. It's actually helped in a lot of ways. And then the other side of that too, that brought us more deeply into healthcare and specifically in a hospital room. My little sister suffered from Still's disease for the last 20 years. So as she spent a ton of time, and when I was 21, she literally was in Stanford Hospital for 10 and a half months, transferring between units and beds. And it was a very painful experience for her, but also for our family. So she spent, I would say, the greater portion of her life in hospital rooms, overnights specifically. Our family spent a ton as well. And me specifically over the last couple of decades have spent a lot of time trying to get rest. And it's very, very challenging when you think about 8 hours of sleep is a third of our life.
Absolutely. What has been the response when you present this solution, you present that data to hospitals, for example? Such an important point that you're making about how disruptive noise can be in that environment. What has been the response to presenting that data to partners that are working with you with these solutions?
Yeah, so there's different ways there's kind of the process, and then there's the value of the data. And then there's the value of the data throughout that process of presenting it as well. And so the process of presenting the data, we went into this with the hypothesis of just like an active shooter, you would really want that real-time alert if someone's coughing, wheezing, heavy breathing happening, an upper respiratory distress qualified event. If there's something like that happening, or there's a critical alarm that's beeping that nurses aren't responding to because they have such alarm fatigue that it's often just ignored, we assumed, this is again hypothesis going into it, that serving up that real-time notification to the right nurse at the right time would be the best use of that information. And it actually turns out, especially through COVID, as you might imagine, lots of hospitals were overburdened. Mm-hmm. Lots of nurses established or really accelerated the burnout stages. And, less nurses serving more patients more frequently in more critical conditions than ever. I would say arguably healthcare, but also specifically hospitals just weren't ready for it. And so they've been more apt to adopt AI and machine learning solutions to enhance that care delivery and the patient experience and just the myriad, because you're never going to have a nurse annotating in every single patient room. These are the critical moments behaviorally and environmentally, specifically acoustically, but imagine visually as well. Lots of different mediums to draw from here. But acoustically, you're never going to have a nurse that's even able to keep up and annotate with every single beep from every hospital pole and all the other sounds. So, we started out with this, let's push a real-time notification, built actually a rule-based system. I could even throw out an example, 5 coughs over the course of 30 seconds with some heavy breathing and wheezing. And you could tag that, time-based over a time horizon beyond a certain decibel threshold and frequency as well across multiple sound profiles. We could tag that as a rule in our system to qualify that as an upper respiratory distress event by a clinician at that point and have it reviewed. But pushing that out to the nursing station when they're so overburdened, they wouldn't be able to do anything with it. It actually increases that level of alarm fatigue. So what we chose to do is look at this on a high level perspective and say, let's look at the stakeholder that is primarily tasked specifically with quietness in the patient room. Think about sound and acoustics. It's all about quietness. And again, that's a third of our lives if we get 8 hours of sleep. So looking at those critical hours, that rest is so important to recovery in a critical care environment, that right there, quietness specifically, has been the lowest scoring domain across the HCAHPS patient experience survey that's administered by Medicare. It actually qualifies much of a hospital's reimbursements. So putting that together and looking at this from an aggregate view of a patient wing or a floor or an entire facility as a hospital and saying, these are the disruptive spaces in your facility. We can give you access, we can give your nurses, charge nurses access to this data, but they just want to look at this on an aggregate view on a daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis, much like a Google Analytics meets a self-service reporting tool to be able to dial in on their operational excellence and improving operational efficiency to enhance that patient experience while also analyzing the building acoustics. You're never going to have, rugs or carpet on the floor. If you think about all the fluids that exist in a patient's room, the materials that are in hospital rooms refract sound really well. That makes it even more disruptive to the patient experience. So giving them tools to understand the root cause, not just an ambient decibel machine that says it's loud or quiet, and here's a number reading, which is typically what hospitals have done. They'll run a sound study. Those machines are expensive. You get after the fact data, and it's not that qualified. We're actually leading towards the root cause. What was that sound? It was a cough. It was an alarm. It was machinery. It was the door opening and closing and someone slammed it, or there was a squeaky wheel in a hospital cart that needs to be fixed because it's disrupting everyone down the hall. We're actually giving them the root cause for that information, access to it in real time, but more importantly, on an aggregate basis, they're able to have enough information to choose that's actionable, to take action on.
That's such a great example of, identifying how much sound tells us about our physical environment, how much sound tells us about human activity or other kinds of activity. That's a great example, and such an interesting way to go about improving operational efficiency, or, as you say, improving the impact, creating positive impact for patients and the patient experience. And as you mentioned, you have a lot of experience through your personal life of that environment. So it's a really great example of using that for positive benefit, using that for benefit. We kind of dove right into the middle of it, and that's okay. I think there's a lot of interesting things that we could touch on from there. I think going back to that idea of, sound as a way to inform us of our environment. I've seen this quote through some of your presentations of, turning dumb noise into intelligent sound. It's a great summarizing statement that has really broad implications. What is dumb noise, and how can it be useful?
Great question. And I would say very simply, dumb noise is less understood sound. Dumb noise is an ambient decibel reader that says, hey, it's loud or it's silent. That's pretty dumb noise to me. It's loud or it's silent, but you don't actually know what is loud or what is silent or as close to silent in that environment. So where we fit in is we actually fit into that sound classification layer, but we can add in other technologies as well for localization. We touched on that earlier as well.
Mm.
Through beamforming and sound source localization, all of that. There's a lot of value in directionality and time of flight and all of that through sounds. The research, the hard math on that's already been done. Where we like to fit in is having a large library, a very accurate model that detects a very large number of sounds. Rather than saying it's just glass breaking, actually, I gave the example earlier, we can actually break it down to glass breaking, glass shattering, and glass cracking literally look different within the waveform, within the spectrogram. They have very unique sound profiles. And same like, with a gunshot, whether it's a gunshot or classifying the actual weapon class, a pistol that could be concealed versus in a handgun, it could be concealed versus an assault rifle. It's a different level of threat as well. So getting into the granular intelligent sounds, that is really how we like to focus our business and solving those pointed use case, I would say in a very niche market, going into hospital rooms, realizing that quietness in the patient room is a $50 billion problem to an underserved market that we're able to actually resolve within a sound classification platform that we built entirely in-house with a model that actually is able to process more than 500 different ambient sounds all in real time, even on a device that's no larger than a case of AirPods right there in the room, invisible to the patient experience, but providing so much value in that environment. And there's lots more to embellish on that piece, but that's really what we like to focus on is what is the actual value to this particular customer in this particular environment. And that's been that entrepreneurial journey for me in building that business case and recognizing market trends. COVID was one that led us very heavily into hospitals. And my sister also was another reason. And all the experience around that. But more specifically, I knew technically how to make it happen because we'd done this with video to process on the edge to intercept those streams and show value to that particular stakeholder or those teams of stakeholders as well. So our tool today is more focused on executive buyers and executive decision makers within a hospital environment than it is on the charge nurse that's working in the wing today.
Yeah, so that data that you're gathering and processing and analyzing allows those decision makers to make some of those critical decisions about operations rather than you said as just an on the floor another alert that can be habituated and becomes another thing that they have to worry about. You're using that data to make those operational improvement processes.
Yeah, and if you believe it, alarm fatigue is actually one of the top 3 patient safety issues and has historically been across industry as well. So as much as we're monitoring for sound and we hear a lot of alarms, a lot of beeping hospital poles, a lot of those going off in every single room. There's lots of studies even done by Hopkins. I think it was more than 700, could have been just less than 800 alarms were heard in the average ICU room just in a given day. And just an average patient room was more than 350. So think about the level of disruption from each one of those frequencies. That's just one sound profile. The doors opening and closing. Think about the operational inefficiencies, I would say, of nursing banter in the hallways beyond quiet hours where doors may be open down the hall. Simple solution, close the doors in the less critical environments. Or if a patient's screaming in agonizing pain and all the doors in that hallway are open, that means that every single patient's being disrupted, unfortunately, by that one patient that's in agonizing pain as well. Let's focus on the care delivery that's most important. And then let's help them to recognize the opportunities to improve for those that can improve on an aggregate scale as well. It's kind of our perception on that type of an environment.
Yeah. I imagine most people aren't familiar with this concept of alarm fatigue or habituation to certain sounds. There's a really interesting story, and I believe it was Tom Furness that shared this when he was doing work with the Air Force, and they were talking about the alarms inside the cockpit of a jet and how the pilots would eventually just ignore them. And the danger of ignoring an alarm. You can imagine if you ignored your fire alarm or, if you ignored a beeping sound in your car, how dangerous that can be, and finding these novel ways to overcome that alarm fatigue or that habituation. And so that's a really interesting approach to using sound data as a way to improve operational effectiveness. So that's a such an interesting thing to dive into. And I think we could probably spend a whole hour just talking about habituation and how to get around that. But I want to move on to some other interesting points about what you're doing. So with all that data being collected, when you were conceiving this, or when you were moving over from the visual processing that you had been working on and into this audio processing and talking about microphones and collecting sound in all these environments, what was the conversation around privacy, PMI, PII, PHI, and those sorts of things? How did you approach that conversation?
I would say that that's definitely been an evolution. And we've evolved very rapidly to address those concerns because fundamentally we believe that privacy is a human right. And you look at a lot of the major technology players, however they choose to interpret privacy. I'll even go back 10 years to my journey to my previous startup, the video analytics play. We built that in the age of GDPR. And we had customers in the UK and all over Europe, partners as well, where we had to very quickly find a narrative where we could stay within that data processor realm. We don't want to be a data storage or a data house for all of that that's uniquely identifiable. We want to keep everything de-identified, anonymous, and show value to say this is the aggregate demographic that happens to be on site in your mall, as one example, or this is how traffic typically flows from your existing security assets. And so when it comes down to privacy, that specific piece, we made a very early decision in building out the technology, saying privacy is a fundamental human right. Let's build everything around that. So literally what we try to do is, I'm going to say, the smart speakers of the world, the Amazon Alexas, the Google Homes, the voice detection and speech detection and classification models that exist out there and have for a very long time. So many large players specifically have focused so keenly on speech that it's done really, really well. To say that speech classification has already been mostly solved, it is fantastic for us to say, let's leverage that intelligence. Let's leverage that research. Let's leverage all the great techniques that have been used on speech classification and detection, voice detection, all of that. Let's use all of that. And as soon as it's detected, we already know it's really accurate because the industries across the world have used it for a very long time. Let's leverage that great research to extract that just so we can listen in for everything else. So that's why we process actually on the edge. It's not like all the sound is streamed, all the audio is streamed up to some cloud to figure out what to do with later, or we're even hit with a massive cloud compute expense. Or, if you think about the data in transit, the expense on the business model to just get it from the room up into the cloud, whether it's over cellular or Wi-Fi, there's a bandwidth expense to that as well. So we just said, look, let's have our models sit right there on the edge, which is why, even from a Raspberry Pi perspective, kind of where we started, we're able to leverage some off-the-shelf hardware, load our software on there, and let that run and process and do all the heavy lifting, remove that from the data in transit, remove that from the cloud, but more importantly, focus on the privacy aspect. For us, it's a sound and a space at a time because we remove all the words, speech, conversations, all of that. We just focus on the ambient background noise that happens to be a sound and a space at a time. So with that being said, we've spoken with the general counsel for the largest payer across the United States. We have spoken with the VA, which we're actually working with today, and a number of large health systems that have implemented our solution. And they're very incredibly risk averse as a vertical. Healthcare, and specifically hospitals, because of HIPAA compliance, because of, we're based in California, so it's CCPA as well from a privacy perspective. GDPR has kind of been that global standard, but LGBT down in Brazil, every state's going to have their own version of that, every country as well. And there's probably going to be local legislature that's impacted and influenced by privacy. So we just look at it and said, let's do everything else. Every other major player, like Nuance was acquired by Microsoft a couple years ago or a year ago, like $20 billion, because they do very fantastic medical transcription in those environments. Great. They do the speech and the intelligence around it. Awesome. Let's do everything else. Let's let those big players focus on that niche space, which is, it's broad, but it's very niche. It's only voice. When we're focused on more than 500 other ambient background noises and the library continues to grow as well, there's a ton of value that's underserved. So that's kind of how I would say, circumnavigate the realm of privacy. Is we don't want to get into identifying you. We want to recognize the most disruptive and frankly the opposite spectrum of that, the most peaceful sounds in that environment to improve that care delivery through patient experience all the way through patient safety and the likes.
Yeah. Is your solution able to derive meaningful data from voice and conversation while it's emitting context or phrases or keywords and those sorts of things?
I'm going to say yes, because we process on the edge, we can absolutely get into tonality, but we're not going to identify this as the patient versus the family member versus the clinician. So
Mhm.
we can have an understanding of the energy in the room or a space.
Right.
Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it moot? Is it somewhere in between? We can get into a few of those heuristics. That's about as deep as we want to go. We don't want to go into identifying unique individuals, because then you get into PII, PHI,
Yeah.
PMI, the health and medical information that becomes identifiable and is averse to the problems we're solving on an aggregate level.
So with these other major players in the voice space, because voice is such a natural way of interacting, it's such a powerful way of human computer interaction, with the way that they're approaching this, I guess what I'm leading into is your involvement with the Open Voice Network and the founding of the Open Voice Network. This seems like a very important organization right now. That this is seems like one of the most important things that we could be looking at is this standards and privacy. Can you speak a little bit to the Open Voice Network and why you found it so important to be involved in founding that organization?
Yeah, I'm going to speak on a super high level. I can't get too granular and in the weeds
Okay.
since I'm not as active as a member every single day, every single week. Vocalytics is my
Right.
baby, and we're definitely very focused on solving problems with that. But on the Open Voice Network perspective, the founder of the Open Voice Network has been a longtime colleague and friend of mine, and a large supporter of Vocalytics and what we've done. And frankly, I've worked with John in the past, and he's fantastic. So, you know, when it comes down to the Open Voice Network and the problems that they're trying to tackle around privacy, around interoperability, Amazon Alexa's got their stuff, Google's got their stuff, Apple's got their stuff that's a little bit more in-house, and there are 1,000 other players that have their own designs as well. Finding ways to say, there isn't just one search engine that's Google. Today, Bing is very prevalent, much and thanks to their investment in OpenAI and ChatGPT and the integration with Bing AI. They've done a great job in capturing a large portion of the market share. Google's had some great innovation from that inspiration as well. I would say from a Vocalytics perspective and partnering with the Open Voice Network, we're always focused on privacy and becoming those thought leaders on how to, and really staying at the forefront of industry on how to improve privacy for the user. How to improve privacy in an environment is really where Vocalytics steps into play. As much as you mentioned that the interaction with voice as a medium, for us, we're more focused on less on the wake words, and for us, it's more on the ambient, passive nature of what is that environment, and classifying and quantifying and providing actionable data in a passive manner. So I would say, a soldier in the battlefield that's driving a Humvee is probably going to have some great value in interacting with the vocal or voice user experience to be able to launch a drone or fire in a certain direction, or maneuver the vehicle potentially as well. Lots of different great ways for the user to operate machinery. Where we're focused on is, can we provide additional intelligence rather than having landmines only in the battlefield? Can you plant a bunch of tiny acoustic devices like the one I'm holding here? Can you plant those to be completely off the grid and provide a level of intelligence and awareness to that operator that comes in a passive fashion, so they can make those better decisions by executing commands? Could be through voice or could be through traditional means or manual means. But for us, we want to provide that level of intelligence completely ambient and passively, which I think is a little bit different than the operability of voice commands.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You have 500 plus sounds that you're in the library already. You're training these models on these sounds, on this ambient sounds. And I think you've made a point to focus on that. And I think that's an important distinction, that ambient and environmental sound is different than vocal and conversational sound in terms of meaning, structure, identification, privacy, all those important facets. With those 500 plus sounds, I noticed on your website that you have the ability for organizations and companies to suggest new sounds and more sounds. How has that procedure been going? Are you seeing anything that surprises you? Are there any sounds that you get requests for and you're like, wow, that's a really interesting thing that we hadn't considered? Or is it a lot of the things that you had already anticipated or hypothesized would be important to derive meaning for?
I would say it's more the latter. It's mostly because we have such a large library already, you find very few nuanced and edge use cases. Some of them have been unique, and none of them really come to front and center and mind because we don't have that many that stand out that frequently.
Yeah.
But it's mostly like, yeah, we can do that too, or we can do a version of that. And if you want to get more granular, and this is where I'll say we can do cough detection pretty well, clearing the throat, laughter, can sound very similar, but they look very different in a spectrogram or in a waveform as well. So what we like to look at is, are you looking for a specific type of cough? And if so, we're not that granular today. If you're looking to detect or to have more clinical diagnostics of or clearing the throat, much as you are right now, if there's a clinical diagnostic of that, we're not focused on the diagnostic path today. It's not to say we won't be or can't be. It's just that we're not focused on those specifics. And in full transparency, the FDA and regulatory path they put up some incredibly steep hurdles where we feel like there's just so much more value to focus on patient experience and patient safety than clinical diagnostics, where we fall in line with decision support rather than actual diagnosis of pneumonia or COVID or COPD or asthma or sleep apnea. We can recognize snoring really well in different types of snores, but the clinical studies that are required to go into that diagnostic path, we'd rather capture great information and pass them along to fantastic clinicians that are world-class in nature, that have invested much of their life into being able to do that. Rather than trying to replace humanity, we're trying to augment humanity. And that's just a core principle that I personally have and have had as long as I've been in AI, 12, 15 years now.
Yeah, no, that's a really great statement. It's such an important distinction. I think there's a lot of people that have concerns around how these tools will be used. I mean, we talked about privacy, but also, the idea of diagnostic and evaluative. I think there's a lot of concern around the evaluative nature of AI models and that data going into it, and people not being sure how that's going to impact them. We've talked a little bit about defense. We've talked a lot about healthcare and environment. What are some of the other areas that people are implementing Vocalytics? I know that there's some conversation around manufacturing or preventative maintenance, environments for workers, and those sorts of things. Can you talk a little bit about some of those other environments and how Vocalytics has impacted those environments?
Yeah, I'm going to say that the history of the company has been very narrowly and nichely focused on hospitals because of my personal story with my sister. And also, it's been such an underserved market that, healthcare is also a fifth of our economy. So, there's some incredible problems for us to solve. Patient experience, we've spoken to that. Patient safety with alarm fatigue, spoken to that as well. The diagnostics, if we want to go into that, that's another entirely separate, probably equally larger than $50 billion problem to solve for as well, for any number of, even just call them respiratory illnesses, respiratory or gastrointestinal issues as well. So, we're very focused on hospitals today. We've had a number of requests for, you mentioned supply chain and manufacturing and predictive and preventative maintenance. If we can hear an engine humming, whether it's on a jet, one of the major airlines in the US that we have spoken about that predictive and preventative maintenance use case. We've spoken with defense and defense contractors about understanding engines on transport vehicles as well. We've spoken with a number of supply chain and manufacturing partners from robotics and machinery in the warehouses as well. And, there are lots of great technologies that solve some incredible problems, and sound is not the right solution for all of them. I'll
Mhm.
give you another example. Energy management, sound. Being able to connect those dots by saying there's a security camera that happens to see down the hall, maybe not all the way down a very long hall in a warehouse or even a government building or a commercial real estate building. The camera might be able to see down the hall, but do you really need to run vision on it when you could run some acoustic? We can hear footsteps as well, or any sounds that happen in that hallway to light up the lights or turn them off if it's silence as well. Typing on a keyboard in an office, why is it so often, and we heard this a lot, especially during COVID, because so many people were working from home or just offices in general by themselves. But why do the lights in my office turn off even though I'm sitting
Yeah.
right here talking to you right now? There's still sounds, whether I'm typing on a keyboard, shuffling through papers, writing on a pen on paper, or you just happen to be sitting here and even breathing. That happens to be another the sound profile that we monitor for as well. You know, Motion sensors can be really dumb. They're really basic and they're really dumb. Sounds can encompass so much more, can help you understand the health, safety, security, maintenance, energy management, and so many other, I'm going to call them use buckets that I'd say today, all of those really apply within a hospital environment, which is easier for us to support a single facility with such keen need and use cases to support across the facilities team, across the patient experience team, across the clinical teams that are all housed within the same rooftop essentially, than going to different verticals and saying we can solve for energy management in every commercial real estate building may or may not be the right solution for that environment. We know that all of these fall into a hospital. So what a great way for us to start, to be able to say, look, we've already built for all the privacy concerns that you may have today, and you may also have 5 years from today. We've already done all of that. So we're a solution provider you can grow with, or can grow with you, and help to serve additional use cases. There's a couple college campuses as well, higher education, that have looked at us and said, look at us as a smart city. Look at us and realize that there are spaces where students need to study, where a lot of the kids on campus wear AirPods or headphones because they need to drown out the sound in order to
Mhm.
get focused study time. But imagine a day in the future where you load up your Starbucks app, and rather than saying these are the busiest Starbucks in your area, it's also telling you where's the quietest place to host a meeting or study in your area. Same as on campus. Where's the quietest place to study on campus, or meet with a group right now, the busiest and quietest. Imagine multiple mediums going into that data set and then providing a better experience for students or for consumers in a barista environment. Those are, we've spoken with retail, we've spoken with retailers, we've spoken with commercial real estate, we've looked at supply chain and manufacturing, and there are so many use cases that it can influence positive value, that it's just today we start with something that's very close to home
Mhm.
and can actually be an experimental ground across so many of those other use cases that happen to be a little bit more niche in each one of those verticals as well. The way I look at it, the value of Vocalytics and really what we want to bring to the world, the sound is everywhere. It's in these rooms that you and I are talking to each other from. It's traversing the internet on Zoom right now. It's outdoors, it's in the sky, and it's underwater, and it travels for miles. Where do we want to start, and what value is that in that use case or to that customer? That's, I'd say, where the entrepreneurial side of me kicks into nature and says, sound is a great solution for all, but it's not the perfect solution for everything. It can encompass a lot, just as much as we can do, footsteps down the hallway to trigger the lights turning on and off from an energy management perspective. There's also a safety perspective of, if someone's screaming down the hall, or there's a security perspective if there's an active shooter as well. It's a myriad of use cases that are tackled through a singular platform or solution provider that we start with one, and we land and expand from there, with each one of these partners and customer relationships. That's kind of been our approach, is land and expand, rather than saying we need to be in 7,000 hospitals across the US or 170 VA facilities. Let's find the right ones that are a little bit more bleeding edge, that are really looking to tackle some of these problems around restful sleep, and patient experience. They're looking to tackle some of these problems, actively working on tackling some of these problems around patient safety as well. And let's look at the timelines and the time horizons and the bandwidth of our company as well as a startup, as lean as we've been, in order to be able to service those markets rather than just going everywhere all at once.
That's very wise. Like I appreciate the sentiment around, it isn't the solution for everything, because I think that there's a lot of technological determinism happening, especially in the startup space. There's a lot of people that are like, this can be everything for everyone. And it's refreshing to see a company take an approach of, this has some really important things that it can do, and we're going to focus that in on what it does really well right here, and let the market absorb that and let it see how it goes, rather than we are the solution for everything that you need. So that's very refreshing. And to that point, what's in the future for audio intelligence? What's in the future for Vocalytics?
Good question. I'm going to say that at our core, we are a signal processing company. And I wouldn't say that this is in the next year or even 3 years, but definitely 5 years and beyond. There's opportunities for us to go into other mediums of signal processing beyond just sound. We're using vision on the spectrogram today. The spectrogram is, sound is really just one of those mediums. That could be analyzing and refining anomalies within satellite communication. Could be, I would say, just frankly, any medium that involves the spectrogram that can be recognized with the spectrogram, because we're running vision specifically on the spectrogram, and there are so many others. So, sound doesn't exist in space, I should say, because it's a refraction of oxygen molecules, but it does exist within a space station. It does exist within a spacesuit, but it doesn't exist outside of that environment. So, that's where I go into satellite communication does actually exist within those environments. Even though there's no oxygen, there's no sound, there's still a spectrogram to measure that frequency and to measure that communication between at least a couple different nodes. So I'm going to say that there's more to come in the future. We're very focused on hospitals. Stepping outside of hospitals would probably be the next logical step before we step outside of sound as an opportunity and a medium. And then graduating beyond that, it's just looking at how can we serve the world and provide the utmost value as quickly and as best possible with the platform we've built as it grows. I'm constantly asking that question from a team, and we're looking at evaluating the right opportunities at the right time. We can't boil the ocean. Where we are today is very much green fields. We're not the only company in the world that does sound classification, but we are one of the few that does as an end-to-end solution provider, where we've got essentially hardware, we've got software. We're a hardware-enabled software solution, an IoT company. We do deep tech, AI, ML. We do all of that as an end-to-end solution. Even being able to visualize that value in a customer environment, we've been able to translate the full workflow. So stepping outside into different use cases first, then multiple verticals after that, and then graduating to different mediums beyond that, I think it's the real opportunity for us to dazzle the world tomorrow.
I think that's a great place to wrap, unless you have anything else that you want to bring into the conversation, other points that you want to speak to.
Nothing comes to mind. I think we had a very holistic and organic conversation here. So I very much appreciate the time. It's always fun to share the journey.
Yes.
And I'm always curious to continue the conversation. If anything else comes up, or if the audience has any questions, feel free to ping me. But yeah, no, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. I appreciate you sharing your journey with Vocalytics, your vision of how this technology can positively impact, society, communities, organizations, and just such an interesting take, like you said, on signal processing and using machine intelligence to create that positive impact.